Today we are going to discuss the question of religious pluralism and the debate on secularism in India. The learning objectives of this particular module is to examine the idea of religious pluralism in a country like India, to interrogate if plurality of religions lead to religious pluralism, to examine the contentions around the question of secularism, and to see what are the multiple positions that scholars have taken regarding the issue of secularism in our country. Religion as an object of study in sociology is fairly new, though philosophers and theological questions on religion have been quite old. While the philosophical and theological understanding of religion have been more to do with the questions of truth, questions of rectitude of religious doctrine, etc., sociology has been concerned with the need to observe, describe, interpret and explain the manner in which religious beliefs and practices operate in everyday life. Another distinction between the philosophical and theological dimensions and the sociological dimensions are, while the philosophical dimensions focus on the normative aspects, sociology focuses on the empirical aspects of religion. The sociological approach became prominent once the theological approach experienced a kind of decline. In today's context in India, sociological attention to the working of religion becomes imperative because the enormous influence of religion in the public sphere and the kind of state patronage and political mobilization of religious groups that we witness and the way in which it is deployed in the name of the nation. Now, India has been home to various religions. These religions have a worldwide presence. Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism and Sikhism originated in India and are known as Indic religions, whereas religions like Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Zoroastrianism and of the Baha'i faith came to India at different points in time and adapted themselves to the existing conditions of our country. Sociologists and anthropologists have shown us how the non-Hindu communities of India have imbibed certain aspects of culture and social structure from Hinduism. In that sense, Hinduism is a more dominant religion because at least 4 out of 5 people in India are Hindus. In fact, the influence of Hinduism is much more than other religions. If one looks at N.K. Bose's pioneering study on the Zhuangs of Orissa, it only highlights the Hindu method of tribal absorption, thereby exemplifying the proposition that Hinduism has a dominant influence. Similarly, major religions like Christianity and Islam also have an enduring influence. In fact, the role of Christianity in the lives of the tribal people in our country has been more significant in understanding their influence. Now, as far as the plurality of religion in India is concerned, the plurality is at 2 levels. Firstly, at the global level of the country, there are many religions, indigenous and foreign, which have adapted themselves to the Indian context. Secondly, plurality is also to be seen at the level of interreligious levels where sectarian and quasi-sectarian movements operate. In the present context, it is important for us to understand and interrogate the history of religious pluralisms in India and whether it has led to religious pluralism on the ground. As far as Hinduism is concerned, religious pluralism, it is said, is an age-old aspect. It is deemed to be as old as the Vedas. Now, the pluralistic tendencies that we see within Hinduism are often expressed in the forms of different texts, different schools of thought different philosophical strands, different gods that people worship. However, as Madan has pointed out, these pluralistic tendencies may not always be egalitarian, because often we find that the lived reality of Hindus is mediated through the hierarchical institution of caste. Hinduism has a way of processing these differences. Hinduism tolerates differences by incorporating and hierarchizing them. This has been evident in the historical trajectory of religion. Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, etc. are all considered to be inferior varieties of Hinduism. Often it is proclaimed that the right of a group to choose a particular way of life, though not conceding that these ways of life are considered equal in merit, is an aspect of Hinduism and has often been attributed as a kind of plurality within Hinduism. Over many centuries, there have been many influences within the Hindu community who have challenged and who have tried to understand Hinduism in a more egalitarian manner. For example, in the 19th century, Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa and his disciple Swami Vivekananda attempted to promote the ideology of religious pluralism by disregarding the differences between the sects and thereby promoting pluralism in word and deed. Again, in the 20th century, it was Gandhi who said that Hinduism would be enriched if it incorporated some of the insights of other religions. Gandhi thought that all religions were imperfect, but had true insights, and therefore his doctrine of religious pluralism was against this tendency to hierarchize religions on the basis of either their way of life or the truths that they offered to human beings. Now, India has the largest number of Muslims in the subcontinent, only next to Bangladesh and Indonesia. Therefore, the perspective of the attitude towards pluralism of these other religions like Islam is also very, very important to understand this notion of religious pluralism. In fact, it has a bearing on the way in which religious pluralism is ultimately practiced. Though Islam is a monotheistic religion and Muslims believe that Islam is the perfect of all revealed religions, a careful and a close reading of the book, that is the Quran, will tell us that there are passages like, and I quote, "To you your religion and to me mine," close quotes. Similarly, there have been people within Islam, for example, like Dara Shikoh in 17th century, who was the heir to the Mughal throne and a scholar, and he undertook a study of the Upanishads and found that the insights of Vedantic Hinduism and Islam were similar, and they were almost like twin brothers. Now, this was not taken very kindly, and he was declared a heretic and was even condemned to death by his brother Aurangzeb, who succeeded to the throne. Similarly, in the 20th century, Maulana Abul Kalam Azad was one of the main proponents of religious pluralism within the Muslim community. Much like Dara Shikoh, he found that there were significant similarities as far as the truths of Hinduism and Islam were concerned, though he had to face criticism from the ulamas. He did not shy away from proclaiming this idea. T. N. Madan states that pluralism as an ideological stance within Hinduism and Islam recognizes and respects plurality, but it stresses upon the oneness of goal of different religions and their religious quests. As far as there have been many attempts to reconcile differences by formulating an alternative third path which reflects pluralistic tendencies in our country. For example, this can be seen in the efforts of the Bhakti saints, the Sufi saints, who express their religious devotion through songs and poems. For example, the tradition embodied by Kabir, by Guru Nanak, the first Sikh Guru, who was a representative of the Sant tradition, tells us that this alternative path tried to talk about the difference between the worshipper and the worshipped. Despite such efforts, T. N. Madan says that a well formulated theory of religious pluralism is still missing. Instead, we have a state sponsored ideology, Sarva Dharma Samabhava, that is equal respect for all religions, but often on the ground this is not enough to promote interreligious faith. Madan, of course, talks about a different kind of accommodation of religious pluralism at the level of the people, and this has to do with the lived reality of the people, whereby they are more willing to accept and live beside each other and ensure that social harmony prevails by accepting the sense of difference between people. In fact, people are more comfortable with the idea of religious plurality. Now we come to the multiple positions within Indian secularism. Shabnam Tejani talks about 4 distinct positions on secularism in India. The first position is the liberal left position, and according to this particular position, religion and politics inhabit different spheres. This position feels that the emergence of Hindutva in the 1990s was a crisis of the secular state, and this emerges because religion is not completely or sufficiently relegated to the public sphere as far as Indians are concerned. Indians are still attached to their primordial identities, and this has prevented the growth of a secular civic ideal. Therefore, this particular position talks of how religion and politics need to be separated and secularism as a practice needs to be upheld. The second position, articulated by scholars like T. N. Madan and Ashish Nandy, of course, feel that secularism has no place in India. They are critiques of liberal secularism, and they feel that this ideology is an imposition from above, and they argue that this doctrine needs to be rejected completely. T. N. Madan, in his well cited article Secularism in its Place, argues that this aspect of religion being a private matter of Indians is something that is more characteristic of Christianity. Now, India did not experience Reformation, therefore, as Christianity experienced, and therefore, this division into sacred and secular spheres is something which is not tenable. It cannot be prescribed in our context. Therefore, according to Madan, secularism is a borrowed idea, and it does not really fit into our social context, which is inherently religious. Similarly, Ashish Nandy talks about how South Asian cultures have a very fluid understanding of what is the notion of self, the notion of community, etc. And therefore, this idea is incompatible with secularism's ideologies of progress and modernization. So, Nandy says there is this attempt to create public and private identities, that is to persuade Indians to see themselves as Indians in public and to see themselves as either Sikhs or Hindus or Muslims. It does not have any meaning in a context like India. This position has been critiqued by many for essentializing tradition, and Sumit Sarkar says that this position shares discursive ground with the position of the Hindu right, the third position that we come to. The third position is, as I said, is represented by the Hindu right, and it holds that the recognition of minorities, especially Muslims, is a pseudo-secularist position. They believe that a truly secular state will not make a distinction between its citizens on the basis of religion. In fact, they blame the Congress party who ruled our country for bringing religion into politics. Now, the proponents of this position claim that it is the accommodating nature of Hinduism which is a result of the failings of not only Hinduism, but also secularism. Hindu Dharma has become weak, and when it encountered Christianity and Islam, it failed to privatize religion, and therefore, there were converts to other religions, but they still remain Hindu in essence. The fourth position, which is the final position, is represented by Rajiv Bhargava, the political scientist, and it holds that secularism, the way in which it has evolved, has many underlying meanings which need to be recovered, which need to be understood. He argues that secularism as a doctrine has been understood as having a very fixed content. It mechanically separates religion from the state, and therefore, it forgets the values that are associated with both religion and secularism. So, therefore, according to Bhargava, the constitutional provisions in India, wherein it gives a kind of credence to the state to intervene in the field of religion, whether for example, in the Article 17 to remove untouchability, or in Article 25 2b, where state has the right to intervene in order to bring about social reform, even the right to open temples and allow people to entry into those temples. So, therefore, according to him, secularism is a multi-valued doctrine, and it came to be associated with democratic and citizenship ideals, particularly citizenship rights of the minority groups, of the religious minorities. Therefore, the state's position of principled distance, that is, interfering to uphold the rights of the minorities, makes Indian secularism distinct, and therefore, it is not wise to separate secularism mechanically or understand the division between the state and religion in a very mechanical way. So, though Madan and Nandi feel that secularism has not had much to offer as an ideology, it has not ensured communal harmony or integration in India, it can be discarded. But Rajiv Bhargava feels that there is too much at stake politically to abandon the idea of secularism, and in fact, he proposes to revive the idea of secularism by understanding the various meanings that underlie it. There are many scholars like Neera Chandhok, Partha Chatterjee, Aditya Nigam, etc., who also critique this model whereby this religion and the state binary produces ambivalence, and it also allows wildly contradictory political positions to exist. But it is important to understand that new meanings are associated with the working of secularism. Each of them have argued that what is important as an aspect of secularism in India is not about religion, but more about the recognition of difference of minority communities within the formation of the national community or the creation of the nation state. In fact, Chandhok says that secularism in India represented a democratic ethos, but one which expressed itself in the language of religion. Therefore, it was not about finding a place for religion per se, but ensuring the rights of the minorities in our country. I come to the concluding part of this particular module, wherein I reiterate the fact that in the discussion that was carried out as part of this module, we can see that the debate on secularism has been a contested one. It has multiple positions which have engaged with each other and yet not been settled. Although religious affiliation has been treated as a primordial form of association that would hopefully lose ground with the coming of modernity and modernization, this has clearly not happened in India. What we witness today is the ascendance of religious mobilization in the country, but on the other hand, political parties usually deny the importance of religion in the public sphere, or claim, that is, those who attempt to address the problem of the religious minorities are necessarily indulging in appeasement politics. We also find that there are several provisions in the Indian Constitution which have acted as progressive measures in an attempt to create a secular state, but many of these measures remain unrealized. Coincidentally, it is probably important to note that the reference, a direct reference to secularism in our Constitution had to wait till 1976, when it was introduced in the preamble to the Indian Constitution as part of the 44th Amendment. Thus, we see that even after so many years of independence, there is no easy resolution for the accommodation of religious community sentiments within the rubric of our nation state. Thank you.